Jai Mahamaya Ki Jai. We'll go on reading from chapter 45 of Devi, the Devi Bhagavatm, retold by Ramesh Menon. Vedavyasa said to King Janamejaya, Vishista said to Harishchandra, worship Varuna Deva. He will bless you with a son. Harishchandra, worship the Lord of the oceans with a solemn yagya. In streams of spectral light, Varuna appeared before Harishchandra and said in a sea voice, you shall have a son, but do you swear you will give him to me when he is born? Desperate as he was, Harishchandra vowed he would. Within the year, by the ocean's blessing, the king's wife bore him a son. Harishchandra called the boy Rohita, and he was as dear to him as his life. But he had not enjoyed his Rohita for even a day when Varuna came to him and said in a voice full of the soft thunder of waves, I have come for your son, O king. Give him to me now. He was the offering of your yagya. Harishchandra said quickly to the Deva of the deeps, O Varuna, a newborn child is unclean. Come for him in 10 days. 10 days later, Varuna came to the king again and said in a voice of moontides, I have come for your son. Harishchandra said, Lord of the waves, a yagyapasu must have teeth. Let Rohita cut his teeth before I offer him to you in dignity. When Varuna came again, Harishchandra said, milk teeth were not enough. Let them fall, and next that the child's new teeth should grow, and later that the sovereign of the ocean should wait until Rohita wore armor, became a kshatra, is purely only when he dons mail, and so on, making great Varuna seem like a collector who came repeatedly for a bad debt. Meanwhile, Rohita grew up. One day, in anguish, his father told him about his pledge to Varuna. He could not put the Deva off forever. Rohita was terrified. Taking just his bow and arrows, he ran away from his father's palace and into the forest. When Varuna heard this, he cursed Harishchandra. He visited him with a disease called Mohodara, and the king wasted from that disease. Rohita learned of this in the jungle and started back to offer himself to the sea god. But Indra accosted him on the way, appearing suddenly before the boy, refulgent. The Deva king said to Rohita, go on a yatra to all the tirthas in the land, and your father will recover. Rohita went to the sacred rivers. He bathed in them and worshipped their divine waters. Word came to him that Harishchandra was well again. Rohita returned to his hide in the forest. But in a year, Varuna's afflictions caused by an imbalance in the bodily fluids returned to Harishchandra. Again, Rohita set out on pilgrimage to the tirthas. His father got better once more, but after a year, the Mohodara returned to Harishchandra more virulently than before. 5 times this happened. Then one day, when Rohita was on his tirtha yatra, he met an impoverished Brahmana traveling with his wife and 3 grown sons, who were about the same age as the prince himself. A bizarre idea struck Harishchandra's son. He said to the Brahmana, whose name was Ajigartha, Brahmana, I will give you 1,000 cows if you let me have one of your sons. Ajigartha wanted to know a little more. Rohita told him all about himself and his father and the offering to Varuna. The Brahmana and his wife stood listening careful on their path in the wilderness. Ajigartha said, I cannot part with my eldest son. He is like my life to me. At once his wife cried, I will not give you my youngest. He is my very breath. It is always thus, prince. The eldest is the father's favorite, and the youngest is the mother's. Now they both looked at their second son, whose name was Sunashipa. That boy stared back in disbelief, his eyes turning from his father's face to his mother's. Then in stricken voice, Sunashipa said, Prince Rohita, take me with me. You, my mother and father have sold me for 1,000 cows. It was high noon One day, when Sunashipa and Rohita arrived at Pushkara, Rohita fell asleep at the foot of the tree. Sunashipa sat numb with grief that his own parents had sold him for some cows. He was thirsty and hungry, and he knew he was to be sacrificed to Varuna. Then the Brahmana's son saw Vishvamitra sitting under a tree in unmoving dhyan. Sunashipa ran to the rishi and flung himself sobbing at his feet. Startled out of his samadhi, Vishvamitra saw a fine young Brahmana boy lying before him in tears. At once, Vishvamitra's soft heart was full of pity. Stroking the lad's head, he said, "Tell me, child, what grieves you? I will set it right." Sunashipa sobbed out his tale. Then he said, "I don't want the yagya for which my father sold me to be the offering, nor do I want to die. I want to live long so I can do enough tapasya to reach Swarga. Help me, Muni. I have no one else to turn to." Vishvamitra summoned his own sons. He said to them, "Which of you will go to his death in place of this unfortunate child? You are rich in punyas by your very birth. One of you can easily be the yagya offering at Harishchandra's yagya." But Madhu Chandas, his eldest son, thought his father was joking and began to laugh. Vishvamitra's other sons laughed with him and said, "Father, how can you sacrifice one of your own sons because an orphan comes and cries at your feet? Next you will tell us to eat the flesh of a dog." Rage, his old enemy, sprang up hotly in Vishvamitra. His eyes blazed and he cried, "A son who disobeys his father is not worthy of being called a son. You be a Chandala, like Vasishtha's sons, and you shall indeed eat the flesh of dogs for 1,000 years. His boys fled howling from there. Vishvamitra was lost in thought for a while. Then he turned to Sunashipa and said, "Go with Rohita to the sacrificial stamba. They will tie you to the pole with ropes purified with mantras. They will smear your body with red sandal and drape wildflower garlands around your neck. I will teach you 2 mantras. You must sing them at the yagya, and no harm will come to you, and the yagya shall be complete as well." Sunashipa learned these secret hymns from Vishvamitra. He went back to Rohita, who still lay asleep, and shook him awake. "Come, my prince, let us hurry to father's sacrifice. I am prepared for what comes to me." Rohita embraced him. The prince was glad the wonderful Brahmana boy had accepted his fate with such serenity. They came to Harishchandra's palace. The king lay in his sickbed in a dark room because no light could touch him. 5 men carried Harishchandra to the yagyashala. They tied Sunashipa to the yagya post. They smeared him with red sandal, adorned him with garlands of bright flowers as an offering fit for the deva. Suddenly, in his unbroken voice, the boy began to sing. He sang so sweetly the magical hymns that Vishvamitra had taught him. At first, the singing was greeted with silence. It was so unexpected. But then those gathered there understood the meaning of the songs. They began to cheer the brave boy. 2 unearthly flashes of light lit the yagyashala, and Indra and Varuna himself appeared before Sunashipa to bless him. Because of Vishvamitra's brilliant sons, Harishchandra was forgiven by the Lord of the Oceans. But that king had learned a lesson from his long illness, that excessive putrasneha is a curse to any father. Now he wanted to go himself to Vishvamitra and learn the profound Brahma Vidya from that rishi. Meanwhile, Vishvamitra's 100 natural sons agreed to accept Sunashipa as their eldest brother, and their father took back his curse. From that day, all the descendants of those 101 were known as Kaushika, and that was their goat name. In time, Harishchandra performed the Ragasuya yagya, the greatest sacrifice any king can. On this is done perhaps once or twice in a yuga. Vasishtha was his guru for the yagya, and he rewarded that Muni lavishly. One day, Vasishtha and Vishvamitra happened to come into Indra's Devaloka together. In the shining place, Vishvamitra said to his old rival, "Muni, you are more radiant than I have ever seen you. Might one ask the cause of your joy?" Vasishtha replied, "Harishchandra has performed the Rajasuya Yagya, and I am his guru. There is no king as pure and as truthful as Trishanku's son." Vishvamitra laughed. "Harishchandra, truthful and pure, you say? I say to you, he is a liar and a cheat. Why, he promised to give his son Rohita to Varuna Deva, but when the time came, he promptly went back on his word. He is a liar and a cheat, and should proclaim this to the world." Vasishtha said quietly, "Harishchandra has learned his lessons. There is no king as righteous as him in the three worlds. I defy you to prove him a liar, and I will wager all my punya against yours." Scornfully, Vishvamitra said, "It will be the easiest wager anyone ever won. Why, I will make Harishchandra himself declare that he is a liar and a cheat." For 1,000 years, Vishvamitra sat in intense tapasya beside the Brahma's sacred lake in Pushkara. One day, Harishchandra was out hunting in the forest when he heard an anguished sobbing from a dense corpse. He saw a beautiful woman there. Her body was luminous, but her face was tear-stained, and great sobs racked her slender form. The king said, "Who are you, lovely one? How did you come to this forest, and why are you crying? I am Harishchandra, and I am the king of this land. Tell me, who has harmed you, and I will swear he shall be punished." She wiped her eyes and said, "I am Siddha Rupini, O Kshatriya, and I am crying because the Rishi Vishvamitra sits in tapasya to have me for himself." Harishchandra said at once, "Be at peace. I will go to Vishvamitra and tell him to stop his tapasya." That king went straight into the deepest heart of the same forest where Vishvamitra sat in searing penance like a flame. Harishchandra went before him and said, "Muni, for what great cause do you pray so fervently in my kingdom? Surely it must be for the welfare of all mankind, so austere is your dhyan." He saw a flush of shame on Rishi's face and went on, "Muni, my people complain to me that they are terribly disturbed by your sadhana. It is my dharma as a king to beg you to desist from this worship. Please leave my country and take your dhyan elsewhere." In dharma, Vishvamitra could not refuse to do as Harishchandra asked, but he was furious with that king. Without a word, he turned his back and stalked away. He left that jungle and went away to his old ashram in another kingdom. But then he created a Rakshasa from his tapasya shakti to have revenge on Harishchandra. That demon had the shape of a wild boar and was as big as a small hillock. Vishvamitra sent it to Harishchandra's kingdom, to the king's private forest where he went frequently to hunt. That boar was a spirit of havoc, and crying shrill cries, it fell keenly to his tasks. With curved tusks, the boar began to destroy the forest. Parts of it were carefully tended garden maintained by Ayodhya's army for the king's pleasure when he came here with his queen. There were fine lotus pools, here painstakingly laid rockeries and groves of shade trees planted by the palace gardeners. The demon boar savaged all these, leaving shambles wherever it went. The king's forest guards tried to chase it away, but crimson eyes glittering with unnerving squeals of rage, the creature flew at them. The soldiers' arrows and swords glanced off the great pig's hide, and it managed to gorge some of them before they escaped with their lives. Those forest guards flew back to Harshchanda and told him what was happening. The king asked, "What Danava or Yaksha is this?" His men replied, "It is a great boar, Lord. Its back is as high as a man's head, its tusks are like sword, and its hide is so thick our arrows fall off it like wisps of straw." When Harishchandra heard what the boar had done to his woods, he called for his horse and a small army to follow him into the forest. With elephant and horsemen, foot soldiers and warriors and chariots, the king set out to kill that beast. Before they saw the animals, they heard the keen noises of delight it made as it continued to devastate everything it saw. Then, coming into an open glade, the king saw the boar, and it was bigger than he had imagined. Erupting into shrill screams when it saw Harishchandra, the boar charged him in a thunder of hoofs, earth flying everywhere. The king raised his bow and, quick as thinking, shot 10 scorching shafts at the boar. But they fell on the demon boar's hides like stalks of grass. The boar still came on. Harishchandra drew his sword and held it before him in both hands to impale the brute. But when the boar was a few feet away from the king, it leaped high over his head. Whirling around, Harishchandra shot another brace of stunning arrows at the animal, but it had gained the trees at the far end of the clearing, and the king heard it crashing away through the undergrowth. Leaping onto his horse, Harishchandra pursued the demon boar through the forest with his soldiers after him. But that creature set such a pace that soon only the king himself remained on his trail. All the other men fell far behind. Plunging through the dense jungle, the boar led Harishchandra further and further away from the city and his armies. But furious as he was, the king perceived the animal determined to have its hide today. He rode perhaps for 2 hours and soon plowed through the trackless forest that grew more and more strange around him. The going now was slow, and suddenly he did not hear the boar ahead of him anymore, making its frenzied way through the trees. All was silence, and the king knew that he was very lost. He dismounted from his horse and mounted from his horse and made his way through the trees in the direction he imagined he had come from. But the truth was that Harishchandra no longer knew where he was going. Very little sunshine pierced the thick canopy above him, and he could not even find his way by the sun, it being directly overhead. Panting, exhausted, and frustrated that the demon boar had eluded him, he broke into a small clearing through which a merry stream chatted through the looming jungle. The king knelt eagerly to drink, and his heaving horse drank beside him. The boar had vanished as if into thin air, which was not far from the truth, for the Muni who had created it with his sorcery had undone its mortal elements. Now its mission was fulfilled. As the king finished drinking, he became aware that he was not alone. An old Brahmana had materialized at his side and stood looking gravely down at him. Despite his apparent frailty, this person seemed possessed of an exceptionally vigorous manner and was a radiant presence in the forest. The Brahmana said, "O king, for what I can see what are you doing in this grim vana all by yourself? Where are your soldiers and trackers? Are you looking for treasures, perhaps, that you have come here all alone? Tell me, who are you?" Harishchandra folded his hands and bowed to the bright mendicant. He said, "Muni, I am Harishchandra of the House of the Sun, and I am the king of Ayodhya. This morning a demon pig rampaged in my private woods, and I gave the beast chase. It led me deep into the forest, and my men could not keep up. I lost them along the way, and now I am lost myself. Brahmana, can you help me find my way back to Ayodhya? I give you my word that you shall find me grateful, O sage." So said Vedavyasa to King Janamejaya. Jai Mahamaya Ki Jai.